Lacrosse community, my name is Ryan Berns. I'm the founder of the Lacrosse Leadership Institute. It's our mission to empower all those that love lacrosse to ultimately utilize the skills that you learn from the sport to live your best life possible. Today, we're so fortunate to be joined by Greg Kenneally. He's the co-founder and president of East Coast Dives, or ECD Lacrosse, which is, I think, in the world, one of the top recognized brands. So Greg, thank you so much for being with us. Our community is so excited. For those of the members that are maybe new to lacrosse or aren't quite sure about ECD Lacrosse, can you start off by sharing a little bit about yourself, how you found lacrosse, and what you guys have been up to for all this time?
For sure. Well, first off, thanks a lot for having me. I love getting the chance to speak to young lacrosse players, young aspiring entrepreneurs. I think it's super popular or super important in some of my favorite work that I do. So me personally, how I got into the sport, I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. It's known nationally as one of the lacrosse hotbeds. You know, that's when people think of hotbeds of lacrosse, they think of Baltimore, Maryland. And that's because it's been here for so long, and there's a long lineage of parents and grandparents, even great-grandparents, who have played here. So my dad introduced me to the game when I was right around 5 is when I really first started getting out in the backyard and playing. He played growing up in high school and college. And so I have a twin brother. We're the same age. We've done everything together throughout our whole lives. So he introduced us to the game around 5, and we played other sports growing up. But by the time we were into our later years of high school, we pretty much narrowed down to just lacrosse, as most kids do here in Baltimore. I do think it's super important to make lacrosse part of your athletic experience, right? I mean, there's become more of an emphasis from college coaches on multi-sport athletes that are a little more diverse. But that's, we played 3 sports all the way through our freshman or sophomore years of high school. So even all the way up, we played 3 sports, but then narrowed it down to really just our love and passion of lacrosse. Super fortunate we were introduced to the game early on in our lives. But as you've seen from a number of role models, specifically Paul Rabel's a big example, you don't have to start when you're 5. You don't even have to start when you're 10 or in middle school. You know, if you start as a freshman in high school and you put that work in, you really dedicate yourself to learning the craft and getting your 1,000 hours, you can still be one of the greatest players to ever live. So people get discouraged. They don't start early enough. And I really don't like to tell people I started when I was 5, because then they're like, oh, that's so early. There's no way I can catch up. It's kind of daunting, but it's really not the case.
I think that's an interesting point as well. It's how do you get that 1,000 hours, the 10,000 hours? Because ultimately the top players, they have this instinct of what to do and when to do it. But that's because they have so much data and so much time that they've been on the field in different situations where all of a sudden it's an instinct, but it's because they're making decisions really fast. I do want to take one step back, though, because I know you said your dad brought you into lacrosse, but I'd like to ask you if you remember your first lacrosse coach, or is there a specific coach that you have that really sticks out to you that you felt made a big impact on your life?
Yeah, so my dad coached us all the way through to when we were done with rec ball. So I guess we were freshmen in high school, we were 8th graders. So he was the coach of the team. And it was really great because he still coaches to this day. He's been coaching for almost 30 years. And he loved the game. And so it was good to have him as our dad at home. But when he was coaching us, there was no nepotism. We didn't get special treatment. If anything, we got harsher treatment. And I think that was really helpful. So he had a really great impact on my life, lacrosse, as well as he's an entrepreneur as well. So he instilled those values in us kind of at the same time. And the other coach that we'll talk about a little bit later, some of the values that he had, but he was a hard-nosed, old-school kind of coach and really focused on mental toughness, both physical and mental toughness specifically, and really valued those players who could make those tough plays and were leaders. And so coming through college, those are some of the lessons that I think I learned from lacrosse, but also have helped me since I've graduated.
Oh, awesome. Well then, Greg, do you have any lacrosse pinnacle or big moments that really stick out to you over the course of your life?
Yeah, I think, obviously whenever you win a championship, that's going to be a moment that you look back on fondly. When I was a senior in high school, we were not as highly ranked as the school had been in the past, had graduated a lot of talent, and had to battle through a tough season to end up winning the MIAA championship. I was on that team with players like Steele Stanwyck and Joe Cummings that would go on to be top D1 players, beat Boys Latin, who hadn't lost a game in 21 games, almost 2 full seasons. In the championship at UMBC in front of almost 10,000 people. It was a pretty unreal experience and something that has definitely stuck with me to this day. It's unfortunate, there's not a lot of video from it because that was, going on 10 plus years ago, but there is still a scrappy kind of YouTube video that you can watch that I go back to every now and again.
I think that's so cool that there's the environment and the stage is set for you guys to have so many people watching a high school Friday Night Lights or whatever it was, that type of event that's just a spectacle you can go back to and look. Do you have any highlights or big moments, or is there anything you're exceptionally proud of with what you guys have been doing professionally with ECD Lacrosse?
Yeah, so we have not as much as I'd like to, but some initiatives to help give back to the community. One thing, or one employee here, Sean, just started is a scholarship fund, which I'm really excited about. We just gave out our first scholarship. It was $1,000 through Harlem Lacrosse to a young woman in the city who had really worked hard and excelled at her game. So we had a $1,000 scholarship to send her off and help with her books, tuition, room and board, whatever she needs to go off to college. And so that's something we're going to look to build on. We've got a golf outing, we've got an auction where we're going to look to take on even more students, raise even more money. So I think that when I look back at my playing career or my working career, there's a lot of things that we do that are great, right? Really great equipment. We work with some of the best players. That's all well and good, but at the end of the day, the most lasting thing you can do is have an impact on someone's life. And so that's what we're hoping to do now that we are pretty established. I think we can look to start to give back to the community in those kinds of ways.
Oh, that's so great to hear. I think it's such a big thing, and that's why we started this conversation. Is we truly believe that lacrosse has such an impact on people's lives. So if people don't have the same access as we did, try to give it to them. If it's resources, that seems pretty easy, but let's give them that. If we can have conversations and be a helping hand, mentor, that's another great avenue. And I think that's something that great leaders do. And it seems like that's what you're up to as well, Greg, which is why we wanted to bring you on. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts on leadership and what leadership means to you?
Yeah, I think for me, I never looked at myself as a leader growing up. It was sort of something that I grew into. And even now, I don't look at myself so much as the boss or the president. I really don't like that title. I think co-founder is what I'd rather go by, because everyone here, I feel like, even when I talk about people outside, I refer to them as coworkers. I want this to be a group experience. And one thing I found most valuable, whether when I was the captain of our team in college or here, with everyone that we manage, is leading by example. So you never ask someone to do something you're not willing to do yourself. And if you really want people to follow what you're doing, it means you need to be doing it first. And so I never have any, people are working on weekends. I don't know, also be working on weekends. I don't want to be there too. If people are working events, I need to be there doing that. If I can expect people here to do something, if I'm not doing it myself, it's never really going to land. So I think that's the most valuable piece, whether I was the captain of the team or leading people here, you got to do it yourself first. It goes top down.
So it's the idea of leading by example. That way you can ask others to do whatever it is, or if you see someone's doing something and setting a higher standard, you as a leader have to rise to that occasion and make sure that everyone embraces that as the culture of the team.
Right. And I also think one thing that is important, and you read about stories in NFL locker rooms about the same kind of thing, people picking up trash, is that there's no job too small for you as a leader. That I try and do almost every job here, at least for a day or an hour, a month. I go out and drink six with the team. It's important that the one story I remember in the locker room is that one of the players had called all their people out for not picking up their own trash, and someone else would come along and do it afterwards. And I think that if you're going to be a successful organization, no job is too small for any employee. We expect everybody here to take the trash out to work events, whether you're, one of the executives or one of the warehouse workers.
And that's so big because we all have to do everything at a high level. It said how you do some things, how you do everything. And that's why no task is too small. It all should be done at an excellent level. And if you do everything right, continues to build. And we also know that your team's only as strong as the weakest link. So we may have to provide a lot of resources in an area to make sure that everything's elevated so that we can reach our full potential. And that's often what we're talking about is leadership's bringing out the full potential of your team. And if you can do that, you can accomplish things that you just don't even know. And that's something that I picked up from a lot of great leaders that have been on and coached me and we've been a part of. I know you said that there was a coach that made a pretty significant impact in your life with mental toughness. I don't know if that is part of the motto and mission of your guys' company, but I'd love to pivot back to that conversation from earlier today and hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think just Coach Corcoran coached my 4 years in Elizabethtown. He was a real old school coach, a legend, both playing and coaching. And he focused on those hard-nosed plays, the fundamentals, And just back to the old school way of playing lacrosse, where you put your nose down, you did the work, you didn't complain whether it was raining, whether it was snowing, and just focusing on players who had the mental toughness, like I talked about, which is such an intangible point. It can't really be taught. It's very tough to learn. You got to learn it the hard way. You got to go through those tough times. And that's what he focused on. I think that stuck with me. And my dad kind of the same thing, with the hard work pays off being the motto here, which is how he always broke our huddles down from when we were 5 all the way up until middle school. And he always used to, when we were in school, he would say, work first, play later, which basically meant once you're done with all your work, then it's time to relax and go do your leisure things. And that was a great thing to look back on when I was in college, because of so many distractions, so many things you could be doing, that if you finish your work first, then you could go relax. And it's a basic thing, but it really stuck with me.
Looking back at your life now and the hard work that you've had to put in, whether it was just practices in the rain, the snow, or bad weather, or what are some other examples of that hard work that you had to do? And then can you also provide us an example of what that payoff is now, looking back at your life?
Yeah, I think the toughest time was right when I started the business, the summer and fall of 2011. I had a full-time job as an accountant. I had a coaching position for a rec team. I had graduate school classes. And at the same time, with whatever time was left, I was running the business. So my day basically looked like 8 to 4 accounting, 4 to 6 coaching, night classes, and then, 8 to 9 to 2:30 in the morning was, East Coast dives basically in the basement by myself, and just wake up, rinse and repeat. And so, I don't like to glorify hustle culture. That's something that's getting proposed now, is that you really just need to grind yourself to shreds to be successful. That's not the case, but I think there is a certain time in your life where you can put your nose down and say, I'm just going to work through this 6 months or a year or 18 months. It's not sustainable for the rest of your life, but sometimes, you look at, maybe you're approaching your senior season for high school and you want to be the best player you can be. For a certain amount of time, you can really put your head down, and you'd be surprised how much work you can accomplish in a short period of time if it's really what you dedicate yourself to. And in the end, you'll see the results, right? Like I said, you can't do it forever, but if you really focus on something very specific for a certain amount of time, you'd be surprised what you can accomplish.
And that hyper focus is something that's so big, and it starts with setting a goal. And that's why I'm hearing in this conversation, Greg, is you set a goal, you realize, hey, it's going to suck for a little bit, but we're going to grind. You have to have the tactics involved. And that's where either coaches or mentors can be big, because they can tell you, hey, these are the tasks that you need to do to become successful. Once you have that, then you're able to look back and actually accomplish that. It sounds like your dad was an entrepreneur as well. Did he provide you guys a lot of insight, or how did you go about making the transition and building this into such a large business at this point?
Yeah, so he started his own accounting firm right when my brother and I were born. So it's been around for 30 a couple of years now, and he started it just like I did, just himself, doing every single piece of work himself, and then it has eventually grown up to be a relatively large firm. And eventually, the advice that he gave to my brother and I is that if you really want to become a larger business, you have to, what he called, take your hands off the potting wheel, which means that the two of us couldn't physically be making every single product. We had to find a way to scale. And that's when we really shifted away from services, stringing and dyeing, which doesn't scale at all, right? You can never really string more heads per hour without adding more people. But the mesh could be done in a way where we could switch to mass production, have an assembly line, put in processes. And that's when we realized that the mesh was really the future of the business, because Mike and I could switch more to management and hire people to scale to production so that we could go sell, we could go market, and then the business would scale. And that was the big turning point.
And that's such a big part of it. And that there's also something to say about doing your job. When we have a larger organization, or if we have a team, like a lacrosse team, there's 10 players on the field, but there's 40, 50 people sometimes on a roster. Everyone has a specific job. Not everyone needs to have their hand on every little thing, because then you can't run as fast, or you can't scale as much, or be as successful. And you sharing this story, I think, helps illustrate this example of how lacrosse and what you're doing on your team can ultimately do and reflect to where you are now. It started with a goal and a vision. You guys put in the work, you got some more tactics out of it, got some coaching training, and now you're there. And you're in a place where the business is known around the country, around the world. I'd like to ask you a question around goals right now with your business, though. And I know you said you haven't made as big of an impact yet in the community, what other goals do you have right now? Or when you guys are working and thinking about next year, the next 5 years, 10 years, what do those conversations look like?
So our goal for a long time was to be number one in mesh. So I have a couple sayings up on my board, but one of them basically results in do few things and do them very well. So like what you're talking about, we want to be deep rather than wide. So we have the opportunity, of course, to make a helmet, to make uniforms, to make protective. And people ask us all the time, when are we going to do those things? But we know for our size of organization, to beat STX or Nike or Under Armour, who have been around for 3 times as long or 3 times the size, we can't compete in every piece. If we want to be the best and make the best heads, vests, and shafts, those are the only things we can do. So we take our whole 20, 30 person operation and focus it all on those very few items. And by doing that, by being laser focused, that brings quality, that brings an increase in innovation. And I think that's what's set us apart. And some of the younger people might relate to, the example I use is Tesla all the time with our carbon fiber shafts. So sure, Ford and GM, they'll all make electric cars, but I think the fact that Tesla only makes electric cars, whether it's mentally or it actually is in reality, makes people feel like they make better electric cars because it's the only thing that they focus on. And so we only make carbon fiber shafts. Whole huge segment of the market uses alloy or metal shafts, and we could sell a lot of them for sure. But it's a conscious choice not to, because I think we will make higher quality carbon fiber shafts than everyone else, both in reality and in perception of players, because it's all we do. It's the only thing we're focusing on. We're not spending any time on anything else. So the lesson there is to, like you said, with the team, to be deep rather than wide. If you play attack, you don't have to have every move in your arsenal. You just have to be really good at 2 moves. If you look at some of the best players, Matt Rambo and Grant Amen, if you watch their film, I bet they only score 3 or 4 different ways. You don't have to do everything, right? You just have to be really good at what you do want to do.
And to dive a little deeper, how do you get really good at what you want to do? Or can you re-hit on some of them? Because you hit a few things, but I want to make sure we highlight on them.
Yeah, it's just a matter of what you're spending your time on, right? Your repetitions. You only have so much time in the day. And so my plate is full. If we said today that we want to add protective or a helmet, I'd be an overload and something else would suffer. So to relate it back to lacrosse, right? If you're a defenseman and you really want to focus on being that lockdown guy, sure, you could really put a lot of time into also trying to practice your transition, your shooting, your scoring, but you're just not going to be as good of a stopping defender that way. You just can never be perfect at everything. So you have to pick and choose where you're going to have that trade-off and focus all your time training on those specific things.
And that's big. And within that, you get the focus, and there is some innovation as well within those specific tasks. And that's what I'm hearing from you, Greg. You guys focus so much time or block out your time on different things. So for the shafts, you have the innovation, what the standard is, how you can raise the bar with the innovation, how you guys can get together and really focus there is just so massive. And I also think about just lacrosse as well. We had a team meeting with the Arizona State University team last week, and Chris Malone, who he does remember coaching with your dad, and so that's pretty cool. But he was talking with the guys. He'll go to practice early and see people just practicing shots. When the game comes, sometimes some of those guys, they don't even take a shot. So it's, hey, why are you practicing something that you're not going to utilize? It's pick a lane, know what your role is, and just work on that. Work on dodges if you're the dodging, because that will get you the ability to shot. If you're a transition guy, work between the lines. Figure out how to get a ball on a face-off. If you're a defenseman, the biggest part of your game is going to be off ball, because so much of the game you're not playing one-on-one D. It's being on the back side. I think those little things go so far, and they translate to the real world as well. It's how do you have communications with folks? How does your brand appear when you're not actually speaking with someone, but people are looking on you? How are you showing up day in and day out? And I think it all boils down to the toughness and being willing to stay disciplined in whatever approach you're taking on. I know, Greg, that this conversation has been just amazing from my side. So thanks for being here. We're wrapping up on time. Do you have any last thoughts on leadership, lacrosse, or how the next generation can become the best version of themselves?
Yeah, I think just like you mentioned off the top, the motto, it's the first thing you see when you walk in, is hard work pays off. And I think, it's pretty basic. It's not an uncommon saying, But it really does apply to every aspect of your life, whether it's your personal relationships with your family or a significant other, whether it's school or your athletic endeavors. It applies to your whole life. And it's not, if you put in the time and the effort and you really commit yourself to it, you're actually working on it, not just running through the motions, you're going to see the results. And that's just plain and proven, no matter what you're working on. So I've seen it in lacrosse, I've seen it in business, I've seen it in my schoolwork. My brother and I were average students at best, scraped by in school, and not due to a lack of effort. We're just not the smartest people in the world, and we accept that. But what I do think we are is the hardest working in our industry, in the office, and that's going to come back around one way or another. We're not exceptional athletes either, but we were certainly the ones out there taking extra reps after practice. And those are the people that are going to end up excelling, not necessarily, the old saying that, hard talent doesn't. So whenever, the one about not needing all the talent, just the hard work, and you can make up for what you lack with extra effort and hard work. And so that's what we try to tell people. I'm sure they've heard it other places, but to feel a real world example and to come in here and see what maybe their hard work could result in, I think is impactful.
Oh, well, I love that. Greg, I know you guys are just on top of it with everything that you do. If our community wants to connect with you or follow you more, how should they get in contact with you, or where should they be following you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, we're at ECD LAX. We've got tons of fun stuff, like some of the best highlights in the country to watch on YouTube, youtube.com/ECD. We have stringing tutorials so you can string a better pocket. We're going to be starting some series with our pro players to show you guys some of their signature moves and break them down so you can work them at home. There's entertainment stuff. There's pretty much something for every lacrosse fan on there.
Awesome. And I even saw we got some highlights and some little tips for the PLL bets, which was,
Yeah.
which was a lot of fun to watch.
I think that's one thing real quickly that a lot of the players can do out there is if you watch our highlights, you're going to see some of the best high school kids in the country. It's, a lot of people, it's tough to compare yourself to them because they are the best and they travel here to play that way. But I would look at our highlights and break down what players you think you seem like and look at the way they score, right? Look at what move they did to get to where they were on the field and go out and try and emulate that. You can learn a lot. The highlights are for entertainment. They're great. But if you really pick out some of those plays and try and break down what that player was doing, you'd be surprised what you can learn on your own at home.
Oh, huge, Greg. Thank you so much for taking the time, being here for our lacrosse community and the whole lacrosse community in general. It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.